Greetings, everyone. Laura Ellis here with this podcast, which I think you'll find very interesting, to bring some awareness regarding our love relationships and how we tend to use what I refer to as weapons of warfare in our relationships, in our love relationships primarily. And the truth is, in people that are in despair, when they're upset in relationships, they begin to use negative tactics. If they're not conscious, they begin to use negative tactics to force their partners to be more loving. Now again, I say if they're not conscious, because if you are, and you've developed somewhat on your spiritually, you're more aware of the things you say and do and why, what your triggers are. So going back to that again, just to be clear, people in despair in relationships often begin to use negative tactics to force their partners to be more loving. And when people do this, when you do this, you withhold their affection and become emotionally distant, which I refer to as, which is really quite an abusive behavior to your partner, considered to be a term as stonewalling. So you become a stonewaller. You're stonewalling your partner, emotionally distant. Why? Because on some level, you want their attention, and we'll get to that in just a minute or two. So these individuals often become irritable and critical, and they attack and they blame, and that could be you or your partner or partners in the past. So what happens is it's more like, why don't you space, or why do you always space, or how come you never? These are just some of the typical, atypical terms that someone who's stonewalling will come up with to their partner. And then they fling, of course, these verbal stones, again, stonewalling, right? They fling these verbal stones in a desperate attempt to get their partners to be warm and responsive, or to express whatever positive traits are in their imaginations. And they often, as you may recognize some of these things within yourself, and I hope that you do, if you're in a dysfunctional relationship and you feel like you may have some accountability here. But going back to this, people that are stonewalling or using negative tactics often believe, okay, that if they give their partners enough pain, the partners will return to their former loving ways. Now, on a secular level, or a somewhat realistic level, that doesn't make sense, does it? Because in a healthy individual, that would actually force them to go in the other direction, not come closer. But here's the reasons why. What makes people believe that they're hurting their partners will make them behave more pleasantly is only because as children, okay, as children, what do babies do? Babies cry and scream when they're upset or when they need something, correct? Okay. So babies, with their instinctual crying responses to distress, and if the parents come running, okay, it's just past conditioning. It's the subconscious, once again, the old brain, okay, if you want to put it that way, is to blame. So now you're an adult, and you're being critical, you're being negative, you're withholding emotions and affection. Why? Because you want their attention on some level, or there's something they need to say, and they're afraid to say it, so they act out in a negative way. Now, most of the time, you know, people are wanting more affection, attention, or lovemaking, or even freedom that they may be craving when they're acting out like this. It's not necessarily just because they're wanting attention. They could, as I said a few moments ago, they could also be wanting some freedom. So here's the question that you need to ask yourself, okay? And think about this. What is it that my partner, either from the past that you're trying to let go of, or maybe relationships that continue to reveal themselves over and over again in the same manner? For example, I'm getting off track here a little bit, but for example, if you've had three strong relationships that have not endured, obviously because you had three, but you notice similar patterns in these relationships, you can rest assured that the old brain, the subconscious, has a lot to do with these individuals that you're attracting. Is there a way to correct this? Absolutely there is, with hypnotherapy and hypnosis. However, to bring this awareness back to where we were, people often don't pinpoint their discomfort and put it into words. They react reactivity levels like a child. Okay, so instead of the kicking and screaming as you would hear a baby do, um, they're going through some other tactics in adult form that they feel they're going to get the same results, and it may again not be at an unconscious level. Think about if we just opened our mouths and started screaming when we needed something or someone to pay attention in our relationships, that would probably have cause to put us in the the nearest facility for looking at us at a standpoint that there's something definitely wrong with this individual. Now, you've got to know that as a baby, okay, we're going to go back to that for a moment. It didn't take us long to learn, right? That the louder we screamed, the quicker our parents or our primary caretakers came to us, most of the time. So that success and that tactic was turned into an imprint, a part of our stored memory, and is also how to get the world to respond to our needs. When you're frustrated, you provoke the people around you. And this isn't everyone, okay? Again, these are examples of people, as I work primarily with women, but men also, that find themselves very frustrated in relationships that aren't working. Okay, so when you're frustrated, either you or your partner, hopefully not, but if you're listening to this, that's the case, will provoke the people that are around you. Now, this could also be in the work environment, not necessarily a love relationship. But I'm focusing on love relationships because that's whom and the situations I deal with mostly. So in that situation or situations, these people that are frustrated are provoking the people around them, and they're being as unpleasant as possible until someone, they will continue until someone they think, whether consciously or unconsciously, comes to their rescue. Now, the primitive, although that may seem primitive, the primitive method of signaling distress is characteristic of most couples, okay? Most couples that are immersed in a power struggle. But there's one example, okay, that stands out in my mind. And I'll give this to you. Excuse me. A few years ago, I was talking to a couple, counseling a couple, who had been married about 25 years. And I was seeing the couple, the husband in this situation, was convinced that his wife was not only selfish, but also vindictive. And his words, not mentioning names, of course, this was some time back, would be something like, she never thinks of me. And he would say things in session like listing numerous ways that his wife ignored him. Meanwhile, his wife literally just sat in the chair and shook her head in disagreement. Never responded, out of integrity, just in disagreement. And I'm observing all of this, of course, that's my job. And as soon as he was through, she leaned forward in her chair and she said to me in a strong and earnest voice, "Believe me, Laura, I do everything I can to please him, and I spend more time with him, and I spend less time with him, and I even learned how to ski this winter for him, thinking that would make him happy, and I don't like the cold. But nothing seems to work." So, to help end the stalemate in that particular session, I asked the husband to tell his wife one specific thing that she could do that would make him feel better. And one practical thing, actually, a doable, measurable activity that would help him feel more loved. And he hemmed and he hawed and then said in a very, let's just say, resistant growl, "If she's been married to me for 25 years and still doesn't know what I want, then she hasn't been paying any attention. She just doesn't care about me." Now, you see, that's a prime example. Someone who was being critical, someone who was saying things that weren't even really truthful, being totally shut out of what was being given to him in his resistance, and missing all of the good that was involved in this relationship. Here was this woman, kind and loving as she was, a very sweet spirit, enlightened spirit, obviously she was, because her reactivity level was non-existent. Very much a lady. On the other hand, okay, this man, like many men and many women, were clinging to a primitive view of the world. So he was not conscious, okay, not as his wife was. And that happens often in love relationships, in past life connections, when I work with people in past life regressions and they have met their soul partner again in this lifetime. And even in past lifetimes, one, not usually the two of them, even when coming back together lifetime after lifetime, are on the same levels. So I'm getting off track again, but you may meet your soul partner in this lifetime from a past life, and yet still be on a higher vibration, still be on a higher level than they were in a past life. And you meet them again, and it's like, oh boy, here we go again. Well, that's because there's lessons here, and you're actually in relationships, in all relationships. You're helping each other. You're helping each other learn and grow and expand. That's what relationships are really about. Yes, they can be amorous. Yes, they can be exciting. Yes, they can be fulfilling, but they can also be very damaging. It's very important to pay attention in the relationship you are in currently, or choose to be in the future, and even reflect back as to how your relationships were in the past. Because partners don't always tell each other what they want, and can constantly criticize each other for missing the boat. And it's no wonder that the spirit of love and cooperation can disappear. And then in its place comes the grim determination of the power struggle, in which each partner tries to force the other to meet his or her needs. And even though they're partners, they react to these maneuvers with renewed hostility, and they persevere. And how sad is that? But it's true. And it has happened to me many years ago. Nowhere near the state of enlightenment or education that I have now. But as I teach others, I too reflect back briefly as I'm speaking, as I'm in session, whatever it is, and can pat myself on the back and say, I've come a long way. And that's my intention for you, to become aware, to grow, to expand, to be happy, and to live in the present moment. And remember, as I close this podcast, knowledge is power. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this is Laura Ellis, transitionsliaison.com.